This is the third video I am shooting in this sitting because I batch produce my content. So if I'm looking a little tired, sorry about that, but full energy inside. I'm ready to shoot. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. My name is Shivani and I'm an artist and entrepreneur based in the sunny city of Chennai in the south of India, which explains all of this sweat on my face. So in today's video, we're talking all about palettes for gouache, and if you're a gouache painter, this is a question you must have had at some point of time about what palettes to use. And if you haven't had that question, maybe you were just using what you had lying at home. People actually don't realize it, but many times the challenges that you're facing with the consistency of gouache, if you're not able to get it to the perfect consistency, a lot of it has to do with the palette that you're choosing to use. I just wanted to clarify all of that, tell you all of the different options that exist for you, and hopefully you'll be able to pick the right fit for yourself. So I've touched upon the topic of palettes a bit in my first YouTube video, which was a gouache 101 video. It's linked above here in case you want to check it out, because you'll find a lot of information in it. And also I'm linking in the description to a new free resource that I just released, which is an FAQ style document that takes you through all the top questions I get asked about working with gouache, right from palettes and brushes to the paints and how it's different from acrylic gouache, also what colors to invest in. So definitely hit the link in the description and check that out. So I'll start with my favorite palette to use, which is this one. Now this is an Airtight palette which you can just sort of fold over and close, and it has lots of wells in which you can mix up colors. Now why I like this is that I often work on larger pieces, and when I do that I like to mix up the colors that I need to use in advance, because, and I've spoken about this a lot before, but when you mix up a color with gouache, it is practically impossible to mix that exact same shade again. You can try using the same ratios of colors, but there will always be just a slightest variation and you won't be able to get an exact match. So if you are working on larger pieces and you're going to need the same color multiple times, it's best to mix it up in advance and store it in a palette like this. And because they store in wells, when you add water, and you can reactivate them because gouache is a water-based medium and it can be reactivated on the palette. And the thing I like about using wells is that you can reactivate it to a creamy consistency. Now I'll tell you a little bit about few other options as well wherein you can do that, but also I like it because it's airtight, and in India it's very dusty around here, so it's good to store it this way. Now I also want to tell you about one more airtight option. I don't personally own that kind of a palette because I do want one, but it's tough to find it in India. I'm adding a picture right here and I'll link to it for those of you who are not based in India. I'll leave an Amazon link to it, so maybe you can check it out, and everything else that I'm showing you in this video as well is going to be linked in the description. So coming back to that type of palette which I showed you on the screen, a lot of artists, especially if they do plein air painting, they like to put out each of their gouache colors which they own directly from the tube into each of those wells, and it's airtight. Now the advantage of that kind of a palette is that the colors can remain wet, and they even take care of it on a regular basis. If the colors are drying out, they spray it with distilled water. You don't want to spray it with regular water because it can lead to the formation of fungus or mold. So it's better to spray it with distilled water if you do need to keep it wet. But what's great about that is that you can just travel with that entire box of colors, and then you just probably need a flat palette along with it to mix your colors, rather than having to travel with all of your tubes of paint. So that's a great option, I think, especially if you're into plein air painting, or if you just want to be able to carry all of your paints around without having to carry the tubes. So I would love to get my hands on something like that, and I'm going to get one as soon as I can, but right now I haven't found one easily available in India. Now since we're speaking about having wells in your palette, Other options are palettes like these. So these are standard round palettes. The reason I like this is that, again, you can mix up your paints in these, and even if you have to store them for a long time, you can still come back and reactivate them, and you will be able to reactivate them to a creamy consistency because it's deep. Now, the problem that happens when you use flat palettes, and I'm going to show you a few of my flat palettes as well. A lot of artists do try to use flat palettes, but on a flat palette, it becomes very tough to reactivate your paints to a creamy consistency. I think it's mainly to do with the surface area and the fact that the paint kind of spreads very thin. Whereas in something like this, even when it dries, it's kind of drying into a cake and it's pretty thick. So when you reactivate, you can pick up more of the dry paint and you're able to control that consistency a lot better. Whereas I've found when I reactivate my paints on a flat palette. So this is my next type of palette. So these are my ceramic palettes and these are flat. If I try reactivating these paints, I'll find always that it becomes way too watery, and then I have to add some more paint from the tube to get it to a creamy consistency. Sorry, I'm getting a little breathless. This is probably why I should not batch create content in the summer, but I'm possibly traveling soon, fingers crossed. So I'm just trying to create some content before I go on my trip. And if all goes well and if I actually go on my trip, you will be watching this while I am on my trip. So I'm creating it about 3 weeks in advance, I think. But yeah, getting back to the video. Like I was saying, the flat palette. So if you reactivate this, it comes to a very watery consistency, which is obviously not ideal when you're working with gouache. So I would recommend sticking to these kind of palettes when you're going to be finishing your painting in one sitting. Now, gouache is an expensive medium, especially if you work with brands like Winsor & Newton, which I highly recommend. If you are looking to grow your skills as a gouache artist, it makes sense to invest in the best brands because there's a huge difference in quality between the budget brands and the expensive brands. I'm linking to another video up here which tells you a little bit more about that. I did a comparison and it's one of my most loved videos, so definitely go check that out. It'll give you a lot of perspective if you're battling between whether to buy an expensive brand or not. When you're working with more expensive brands, you don't want to be wasting your paint, and working on a palette like this, you will find that more paint does go to waste because, like I said, it's very tough to reactivate it to that creamy consistency. So you often have to finish working and then just wash it off. Very rarely can you come in and, like, I will try to salvage these 2 lumps of paint which I have here. There's some burnt sienna and some white. I don't like washing those paints off just like that. So I will try to salvage it. I will add it to some other colors, but I can't use them to their perfect creamy consistency. And that's another tip I have for you. So when you're allowing your paints to dry on your palette, it's better for them to be colors which have been mixed, like a composite color containing 2 or 3 different colors, rather than just the straight out of the tube paint drying on your palette. You will find that when you try to reactivate paint that is fresh out of the tube, which has then dried on your palette, it will end up becoming kind of chalky, and especially some of the pigments, like I found it happen a lot with red. When I try to reactivate it, it just kind of crumbles, and definitely it's nowhere near the creamy consistency, but sometimes it's not even usable. So don't let it dry just like that. It's better if you can mix 2-3 colors together and then allow those colors to dry on your palette, sort of like this. So all of these I can reactivate and I'll be able to paint them in a creamy consistency. So now coming back to the ceramic palettes, I have them in a few different kinds. This one has wells in it, this one does not. So this is more flat and it has 3 different areas on the palette. I have a few other ceramic palettes as well, but they're sort of in the same format. They're just flat palettes, but I really like using them, especially for my YouTube videos where I'm doing a painting tutorial, and whatever I'm mixing up then is just to use in that particular painting, and I'm just mixing very small quantities of paint and using them up immediately. So for something like that, that is perfectly suited. But if you're doing paintings which are going to take you a longer time to complete, then I would definitely recommend any sort of palette with wells or which is Airtight, again with wells, because it's just better and it's easier, and it's also useful not just if you're creating one piece across many days, but if you're somebody who has some particular colors that you gravitate towards, that you keep using time and again in different paintings, then it's good to mix up some of those colors and store them in a palette like this, because it's tough to mix up exactly what you need in a perfect quantity for a particular painting. You always end up having a little bit extra, and with gouache it's always better to mix extra because you can't get the same color again, like I said. So palette with wells, highly recommend. And for the times you want to use a flat palette, you don't even need a ceramic palette like this. You can use even a plastic plate. I sometimes just use that, especially when I'm doing color mixing exercises or creating color charts. I just use a plastic plate and that works perfectly fine. So I hope that gives you a lot of insight into the various types of palettes that are available for you. I know the different options can often be confusing. Even I didn't know what to start off with when I was starting off with gouache. And every artist gives you a different opinion based on what works for them. But what I wanted to do in this video is just provide you all the different options and explain the pros and cons of each, so that you can make an informed decision and get something that suits your kind of work and how you want to be painting. I think that's most important. The palette is a very personal choice, and I personally like having a mix of all, so that I can choose based on the piece that I'm creating what's going to work best for it. And like I said, click the link in my description to download my gouache resource, where I tell you everything you need to know to get started. It's going to be very helpful for you on your journey, and I've also linked to all of the materials I used in the description. And for those of you based in India, don't forget to use my code Shivani10, which I'm mentioning here, to get 10% off all of your art supply shopping with Hindustan Trading Company. I'll link to their online store in the description as well. So thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one next week. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my next video. Thank you again, and bye.